3. We're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. Welcome back. Really happy that we're able to continue the series. Apologies that we had to reschedule last time. We just weren't all that ready for it. We needed a little bit more time to refine the content. That said, we don't expect that to happen again. Let's go ahead and get started. So you guys know us. You've already probably been here a couple times. I'm excited to add one line here. This is the first session since I got Tableau Visionary, so I get to add that now to every slide. Very excited about that. Kyle hasn't changed. He's the same person. Sorry, I cracked myself up. I'm funny. So welcome to the initiative. Same stuff we've talked about before. Our goal is to teach others to code with the Tableau APIs, developer tools. We'll foster, sorry, I'm still laughing at myself. While fostering a safe and friendly environment for users of all skill levels. We are, of course, still in part 1, all about the REST API. Only change here is we've extended this 2 weeks to April 27th to add from the gap that we had these past 2 weeks. We are in session 3, so part 3 of 5 for the REST API. Change the date, nothing else is different from the last time, so we looked at this together. Updates. Let's talk about updates for data dev and the program. So first off, we do have all of this now on GitHub. Kyle, why don't you tell them a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure thing. So if you're not familiar with GitHub, it is a way of storing code remotely to use typically if you want to share code, you have multiple contributors, or if you have multiple machines. I know sometimes I'll be plugging away on my laptop and then I want to work on this, on another computer, and I don't have to worry about sending it to Dropbox or Google Drive, something like that. But it also has other great features that help you manage merging code together. It'll check for conflicts, making sure that if you have multiple contributors that you're not overwriting what each other are doing. And other code management things, like it can check to make sure that your code doesn't have vulnerabilities or recommend updating certain packages if things have gone out of date. But for the purposes of TCI, we really just want to make this available to you guys. So I am updating this. You can see there's stuff from last month, there's stuff from 43 minutes ago. So I'm kind of constantly in here tweaking things. And as we move forward, I'll start creating a folder for each part of the series and then a folder for each session within that part to kind of keep track of what we talked about. And obviously, you're welcome to clone this, which means you make a local copy of your own and kind of go from there. You can create a fork of it, which means you create your own version off to the side that still can communicate with the main version. Copy and paste it, however you guys want to do it. We just wanted to make sure that we had an easy way to get the code to you. And this will be it. So this will be your one-stop shop for finding this in the future. If you have any questions or concerns, obviously reach out to me or Zach. We'll be happy to help you navigate GitHub. If you hear me call it Bitbucket by mistake, that's because that's what we call it at work. But Bitbucket, GitHub, same thing. So yeah, I think that pretty much covers it. You'll probably see us clicking around in there a bit today. Otherwise, let us know if you have any questions or if you can't access anything, we can help you out.
Yeah, absolutely. And the only other thing I'd add to that is it'd be good, especially as you're getting started on your coding journey, to go ahead and sign up at GitHub, create your own stuff. And like Kyle said, you can clone things to your own repositories, things like that, just to grab different copies of things that interest you, and also publish your own stuff. I did post it in the chat, so you should have it. It's also here on the screen. One other announcement from just kind of data dev is the mention of the Trailblazer DX Salesforce Developer Conference. Now, the reason that I mentioned this, because this is Salesforce, not necessarily Tableau, is because this year there's not going to be a Tableau Data Dev Day like there was last year. There's not going to be really just a focused event on Tableau Data Dev. However, here at Trailblazer DX, there is going to be a lot of focus on Tableau content, APIs, the data dev. There's, going to be a lot of people from Tableau there. So I believe there's also a online aspect to it. So maybe worth checking out, and if it is something that you can swing and you want to go there, might be worth your time. Just a reminder that everything that we post is on datatheories.com/Tableau coders. We keep this updated with the links to the content. We keep this updated with the videos once they're available from the recordings, all of that kind of stuff. It is still recorded, yes, and join us on Slack. So some of you might have noticed when you tried to join the Slack link before, it didn't work. So I'm just going to explain that for a second here. So flip over to Chrome, go to Tableau Coders. So there are, if you go to Tableau Coders at datatheories.com, you'll see there's a new little section just to make sure to join us on Slack. So what happened, I didn't realize this, I'm not much of a Slack pro myself, is if you're not already in the data dev Slack workspace, this link might not work for you. So just if you are interested in joining the Slack channel and talking with the people there, we've got, a couple dozen people in there, I think 15, 20. There you can first join Data Dev Workspace via the second link, and then the channel specifically inside of the first link. And just to explain that a little bit more, this is Slack. If you join the second link, that'll add you to Tableau Data Dev. The first link goes directly to Tableau Coder. So you'll see there's some folks in here. There's people asking questions. There's some chatter about the program. So definitely, if you're interested in taking this forward and talking to people, I'd encourage you to try those links out. All right. Let's do a quick recap. Let me open up my chat just to make sure there's a couple, two. All right. So let's talk about what we've talked about in the past. So from session one, just really quickly, you guys have probably just heard us say this, a dozen times. Postman, VS Code, Python, make sure you've got those things. It's always going to be helpful if you want to follow along with any of the code. From session two, from a few weeks ago, we're focusing on Python, of course. Good free resource for Python learning is Automate the Boring Stuff. This is a free web book. This is a free book you can find online. Ebook. There's the word.
There we go.
Ebook. Talking is fun. Talking is fun. HTTP is primary communication protocol on the internet. Kyle talked about a lot about this when he was going through Postman and everything with that. You're going to see a lot of different protocols used in communicating on the internet. Specifically, something that you see a lot are get and post, get to retrieve data, post to send data. Oftentimes you use headers when you send a request to send information in the request, like an authentication token. And there were some public APIs that Kyle mentioned last time. If you did miss the second session, that's okay. We're not really building these so that you have to be in every single session. I would probably encourage you to check out the recording, as I mentioned in the website before. It's definitely worth looking at. I'm going to go ahead, rather than talking through more slides, we're going to talk about coding. We're going to spend a lot of time actually in code between Kyle and myself. Let me move things around a little bit over here. So let's first show what we talked about last time. So just as a reminder, this is the code that we went through in session two. We went through very simple things. We printed out a statement, printed out the words hello world. We established a variable, my number. We printed the number. We did a little bit of math between them. So sum math equals my second number plus minus my number. So taking 15 and subtracting 5 and printed it out. Another string. We did a little bit of string truncating and taking out certain parts of this, and then we printed that. So very simple, basic things. Today we're going to get, I would call it more intermediate when it comes to Python, and we'll go through this. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is a little bit more on the data types. So I was mentioning that before, that we made an integer, we made a string. Let's talk about that a little bit. So we're data people, we probably know this stuff. So if I make a string, it's actually kind of self-implied here. So if I called this string variable, and I called this something like sub, that is automatically string. It's gonna, we can see just because of the quotations, Python knows it says, okay, you gave it quotes, you gave it a variable name. This is string. Same kind of thing if we went with you know, an integer. And I'm probably not going to do these comments because you know, we're already a little behind on time. So if I wanted to make it an integer, I might just do int variable equals 15. Again, self-implied. Python knows I didn't wrap it in quotes. It's a number. This is an integer. And we get into some new things. So if I wanted to make this a floating point variable, I could do something like 15. Actually, you know what? We're on session number 3.1. I'll call it 3.1. Again, Python sees, okay, you're doing a number, but it's you know, there's a decimal there. It's floating point. And so it's just, you know, assigning that variable type. There's other things as well. So we could do something like a Boolean value. We'll just say this equals true. So when I reference this, when I call this, it's gonna, it doesn't like my case right here. It's gonna understand that this is a true thing. So same things I've showed before. If I printed, you know, string variable, and I'm just gonna run this. You see, it's gonna come through here. Second. There we go. So it called that first one. Same thing if I made this now my Boolean value. And again, I just run this. It's going to go through the same kind of thing. And it's going to return true. And so we've got it there. All right, so that's a little bit more on the data type stuff. We're going to cover more data types probably as we go forward. And specifically, we're going to talk a little bit now about list. So if I wanted to go through lists, a list is kind of what it sounds like. It's an ordered list of sequence of elements. So each of these has just basically, when I look at it, it's a list of items. And we actually went through something that behaved like a list. That was a string in the previous session. When we cut this down to, you know, the 0 to the 21st point in that string, it kind of behaves like you would have with a list. So a list would be something like this. So let's say we want to make a simple list. And we'll call this, or we'll actually make this 1 through 5. So essentially what I'm doing is, rather than just making one value simple list, it is a series of values. So if I went over here and I said, all right, give me a simple list, type, that would be great. I run that. What do I get from it? You guessed it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, there's some other different things that you could do with this. We could do something like, let's call the second list. And we'll call, well, this one will actually say, this is super cool. Yeah. You know, I'm just going to copy this down, make this second list. And when I run this stuff, you know, it's going to just kind of enforce what we were talking about. This is super cool stuff. Okay, that's great, but maybe I want to do a little bit more than that. Maybe instead of just making a list and calling that back out, I want to perform some functions on this. So something I could do is I can actually do a sum of simple lists. So again, pretty simple things, but just to show more data people, we like to do these aggregations. You can do something like that. You'll see my terminal down here is responding with 15. So you add all these numbers up, you do get 15. You could also just cut this down like we did with the string stuff before. So if I wanted to do something like print my second list, and instead of it just being the whole thing, maybe I just want 0 through 2. If I run that, you'll see that it actually comes back with this is. So, you know, there's a lot that you can do with these, you know, too more than we can probably cover right now. But let's go ahead and move forward. So the next thing we're going to focus on is if statements. Now, I will say, if I'm going a little fast, all of this will be on GitHub. It's going to be available to you. You can check this out, run it yourself. It also will have a lot of commenting to explain what's happening as well. and if statements. So we all know if statements. They're really actually easy to do when it comes to Python. So I'm going to just give this, two variables. This is usually how I'm going to start something like this, where I just go ahead and prep everything up, my variables that I'm going to use. And what I can do is something like if first name equals second name. So if my first name equals my second name, and let's print why yo first and last name same yo. That's just kind of weird. If I now run this, it's going to come back and I'm not going to get a lot. You see, I don't get anything because this isn't true. So I can expand on this and I can say elif. So just kind of an else, if you're familiar with that in other programming language. First name does not equal second name. I can say cool name, cuz. Run this, and you'll see it come back and we get cool name cuz. Different ways that you could do that. There's also a lot of ways to do a lot of things in Python. So we don't always have to write it like this. There is a lot of options for shorthand when it comes to writing things. So I could do something and write this differently and say something like print sick name cuz if first name does not equal second name, else print y name same. And then when I run this, this is just a kind of, like I said, shorthand. This is simpler. This is not the whole thing that I wrote before. You often see things like this written when it comes to actual code. Next, we'll go into loops pretty quickly. So talking about loops, loop is when you want to just basically go through an iteration of things. So I might do something like second list. So I've talked about that before. Now, if I had this and I was just kept going down, I could still call second list and overwrite the first value. I'm rewriting these things. In my example, it'll be on GitHub. It's all the way through. But if I was calling this again, it would just overwrite the original value. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to say this is not just cool. This is not just super cool. This is super duper cool. All right, and now if I take this list and I go through, let's just say, so I'm going to do a for list. There are a for loop. There are multiple loop types inside of Python. We're going to focus on for. They're a little bit more simple than other things. But I'm basically just going to say for x in second list, print x. So what happens here? If I run this, you'll see that it's actually going to print them one at a time. This is super duper cool stuff. Yes, it is. Now I could do other things in here like else print you know it. And what's that going to do? It's going to go through the whole thing. And then at the end, it's going to print you know it. Now what's happening is basically X could be anything in here. This is just a, it's kind of iterating through the value inside of the list. So for every item in list, print it. This could be, number, this could be whatever I wanted to call it. Now, one other thing that I'll highlight here is spacing is important when it comes to Python. You'll notice that this tabs out over here. We've got 4 spaces. Because I'm using VS Code, it's understanding that it's going through that, specifically. But if I try to run this like this, Python's going to error out. It's not going to like that. Targeting 825, Kyle, just so you know. So importing is also important. So you're going to see this a lot when Kyle takes over. Importing is basically when you want to call a library that you don't have in base Python. So for example, if I wanted to do something like I want to call the time of now, I want to have something that just says current time equals date time dot now. Now, if I tried to run this and I said print current time, and I'm not going to do it because it's going to error out. It just doesn't understand. It doesn't know what I'm doing here. That's one of my. It says, okay, you're calling date time. What the hell is date time? So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to import a library. I'm going to say import date time. Now, what I'm telling Python to do is import this entire library called date time. It's something that I have installed. It's a base installed library for Python. And so when I call it like this, I'm saying, all right, import date time. Now, Python recognizes what date time is. And when I run this, it's actually going to say, okay, you're just telling me to tell you the time of now. And you'll see that pop up here. Eventually. While that's bringing it back, there we go. We get the date time of now. There's other things you can do. Something like this, and I'm going to do a little copy paste so I'm not eating into cow's time too much. Other example, you can import pi. So this is an example where I'm importing math, but I'm being very deliberate. Inside of math, there is a function called pi, and so I'm importing pi from math. So if I run the same thing and I try and print this, you'll see that it actually comes back with the number pi. But the last thing that I'm gonna show here is called a function. Now, rather than typing this out because I'm running low on time, I'm just gonna paste this over. So a function is basically a stored block of code that I'm gonna pass an argument to. So if I want to, basically when I'm writing, I have my code and I wanna pass to something to do something for me and return a response, that's what a function is for. And like I said, Kyle's going to show you a lot of examples for this. I'm going to show you a very basic example. And this is a defined function where I'm saying define it, and it's called greet, and I'm passing name into greet. And basically based on what I pass in, print the response, hey, name, welcome to Tableau Coders. And so I do still need to invoke this. And I'm going to invoke it by saying greet Kyle is lame. We know it, it's fine. So we greet Kyle is lame, and you actually see this is passed up to here, and it says, hey, Kyle is lame. Welcome to Tableau Coders. All right, that's my time. I'm going to pass it to Kyle is lame, and he's going to take over.
Pass it over to the lame-o. Here we go. Thanks, Zach. I'm going to start sharing here just a second. So yeah, so I'm going to start, if you're following along in the GitHub repo, if you've got it pulled up, or if you're just looking at it in your browser, I'm going to start with the file that's called 01 Intro and Best Practices. I'm going to fly through this. I apologize. And I'm going to skip some of the import stuff because Zach sort of talked about it, but I encourage you to read through this. There's a lot of comments in here, and then obviously let us know if you have questions.
And Kyle, I would say, I mean, just go to 50 past, and so you don't have to rush. We'll just do a little less time for Q&A.
Sure, sure. Okay, so the first thing that I am a huge advocate of in Python and other languages is a virtual environment. And so what that means is you basically create a copy of the Python environment that's installed on your computer, and then it becomes specific to the project that you're working on. The main advantage here is if I need to install package A, B, C, and D, but I only need it for one project, there's not really a need for that to be installed and available everywhere. It also helps you avoid conflict. So if I'm using a package in one project that conflicts with a package in another, I don't want those in my main Python environment because then I'll constantly have issues. So you can see here on here how you create a virtual environment and kind of what it's used for. You can see that I have already done that because I have a folder here called VENV for virtual environment. But that's a best practice that I harp on people when I see them not doing it, just because you are inviting headache if you don't work within a virtual environment. The other thing is installing with pip. So Zach talked about importing packages. The package that he gave as an example is a package that just comes with Python. So you don't need to install anything. And actually, when I move into my examples, everything that I am using comes with Python. But there are certain things such as requests. I have a library here called requests. I have a library here called Flask, which is an app that you can use to build simple web applications. So you'll see, excuse me, you'll see if you're trying to import something by name and it's not resolved, or you need to download and install a package, that's what you'll use pip for. Pip comes with just about every installation of Python by default. If you don't have it, I would Google your flavor of Python and how to install pip. But if you follow the instructions that we did in session 1, you should have it without doing anything additional. The other thing that I really want to talk to you guys about are doc strings. Now, doc strings, documentation strings, are more for you write something and then 6 months later, you got to come back to it and remember what it's doing. Or you have co-collaborators and you want them to be able to know exactly what a function does before, without having to go and look at it line by line. So if you look at my example here that starts on my line 48, add 2 numbers, I'm saying, kind of following Zach's example, I have defined a function called add 2 numbers, and then this one takes number 1 and number 2. This bit at the end, I am just saying that this function must result in an integer. This is optional. I'm just giving it here as an example of things you might see out in the wild. But you can see here, a doc string always starts with a triple quote, and that's Python's syntax for a block of text. So if I do triple quotes, everything inside of there, whether it includes additional single quotes or double quotes, will be a string until I get to another set of triple quotes. So doc strings always look like this. They're always at the top of the function, and they should explain what the function does. So this function returns the sum of 2 integers as an integer. Example, number 1 plus 99 equals 100. The advantage here for something like VS Code, and other IDEs will do this too, is once I put a doc string in something, if I import this somewhere else and just hover over it, it will give me that doc string. So this way, if I have a function that somebody else wrote, or I'm not quite sure what it does when I import it, as long as somebody followed the best practice and provided a doc string, I should be able to just kind of hover over it and figure out what it does. Now, as with most best practices, you're not going to see that 100%, but you want to be better than everybody else. So when you go out and start coding, I highly encourage you to include those. So just a little bit more about imports, because Zach covered a lot of this. You can import from a library. So like Zach did with datetime, or like I did in the example up here, from, from requests. You can also import from files. So you can see in my imports here, I have a folder called imports. And within that folder, I have file 1 and file 2. Now, when you're importing Python files, or .py files, you don't need to specify the file extension. It just knows to look in .py files. And you can also, one thing to just kind of add to what Zach did, you can import everything at once. This is not always a best practice if you don't know what's in there, or if you don't truly need everything that's in there. But if you truly do need to import every function that's contained within a file, you can import with this wildcard instead of naming every function. The other thing that I want to call out in regards to imports is what's called down here an inline import. Now, this isn't usually the best option, but you will run into situations where you have imports that conflict with one another, or what's called an infinite loop, or sorry, a recursive import, where you're importing something that relies on importing something else within the same file, or they import things from each other. Typically, you want to avoid those situations, but sometimes you can't. Sometimes things like that just happen, and you'll run into errors that you can't import something because it's trying to be imported by something else at the same time. So you can import things inside of a function or a class, which we'll maybe cover in a later session. But just know that the scope of this is affected. So if I import this inline, this function called frown, but then try to call it down here outside of this function, you'll see that I end up with an error and says name frown is not defined over here on the right. Whereas if I call it from the function inline import, then it's fine. Then I get my little frowny face. So just one thing to know about imports is be aware of that scope changes depending on how you import them. And it's usually best to just import them at the top of your file and only import what you need. All right, so I'm going to move into some more practical examples. Let's start putting this into practice with, let's make some calls here. So apologies for having this all typed up already. It's a little bit more than Zach's, and I wanted to be able to both show it to you and explain it to you. So if you were on session 2, you probably remember this dog API that we used. I'm using this as just kind of an example unattached to Tableau so we can get the concepts, and then we'll move into some Tableau stuff. So as you can see, we did some GET requests to this dog API for list all breeds last time. That was one of our questions to give us like the 3rd or 4th breed, something like that. And this represents that exact same request in Python. So you can see here my doc string is saying send a simple GET request, and it returns a JSON object with all of the breeds that are available through this API. So if I go down here and I'm going to comment out everything related to the second call for now. So what we can see here on line 9, I'm specifying a URL. That's pretty straightforward. And then I'm assigning a variable called RESP, which is response. You could call it request. You can technically call it whatever you want. But when I make requests using this request library, I typically call it RESP because it's the response. So when I run this, you can see, or sorry, before I run this, you can see one difference here is I am returning something rather than printing something. And so what that means, let me give you an example here. So unlike Zach's before, if I just call get all breeds like this, doesn't take any arguments, so I can just call it without anything and I just give it an open and close, then you will see that it actually doesn't do anything. So the difference between, or it doesn't show anything, it does something. The difference between returning and printing is printing means I want you to just throw it into the console. I want to see the output and that's it. Returning it means that I want you to actually assign that value in memory so that I can use it again. So I can pass it to another function or I can manipulate it even further. So if I do it like this, in this block down here, you can see that, and I'm going to skip this line for a second, but you can see that if I assign all breeds as a variable to this function and then print all breeds after that, then I get what I would expect. So it's important to know the differentiation. Sometimes you want to print things immediately because you want to see them or you're trying to debug them. But typically when you're trying to do something that's part one in a series of steps or calls, you're going to return it rather than print it because you want to pass it from one place to another. So the second function on this page is a random image by dog breed. And this is also a GET, but this one takes a little bit more information. And there's something that I want to point out here that I think is really useful for you guys. If you haven't seen it before, or if you have, you may have seen examples in Python where you see things like this, where you have a string that has some curly brackets in it, and then at the end we have .format, and then a list of variable names. This is kind of the old school Python 2 way of doing things. So it still works in Python 3, but you can, to break down this line, what I'm saying is, given this string, and anytime I come across curly brackets, Python knows I'm going to tell it to sub something in for that. And then I use this .format at the end, and I just list the variables in order, or I can index them. But right away, I think it becomes obvious if I had 3 or even more than 3 or so things to give here, I would get this really long line, and I would have to look and go, okay, this first thing jumps all the way back here, second jumps all the way back here, et cetera, et cetera. So the better option that became available in Python 3 is what's called an FString. It's a formatted string. You might see them called FString literals or FString interpolation, but it's all talking about the same thing. And what this does is this allows me to put the variables in, just name them where I want them to go inside of curly brackets. So instead of having to read through this, find this, jump back, I just see that, oh, okay, I want to sub in the argument that this function takes called breed name right here in the URL. And the way you know you're working with an F string is pretty obvious. You'll see a string that has the letter F in front of it. This can be a string that, I'm blurry here, give me just a sec. Focus. I look like I'm in witness protection. I don't know what happened. Anyway, let me take a step back, take a step forward. It'll come back. Anyway, so when you see a string that like this that has an F in front of it, that means we're using this literal interpolation, excuse me, of putting the variable names in like this, and that you're looking at an example from Python 3. You can use this with single quotes, double quotes. You can use it with a triple quote block like I was speaking of before. Let me try closing this shutter. That's driving me nuts. That is insane. Why did I go all blurry all of a sudden? Sorry, guys. All right, that's a little better. Anyway, I'm going to keep going. So it's very similarly, I'm going to call a resp here, and I'm going to get request.get and send it the URL. And let's change our commenting around here so we only call the second one. And one thing that I want to call out here as well is you can see that sometimes I wrote in here, sometimes you'll want response.content, other times it's .text. It really depends on the on the API, and your API should tell you, you know, if you check the documentation, it should tell you whether you want the text of the response or the content of the response. Those are usually the two that are used. You'll also notice here, actually, I'm going to run this first and then tell you guys something. So if you look at this, in my first print here, you can see actually that it gave me what looks like an object full of responses. But if you look really closely here at what printed out, it printed out a B and then a single quote before the response. And what that means is that this is what's called a byte string. It's just a different type of string. But this API actually returns by default stringified JSON. So if I wanted to take this and use it somewhere else, I'm actually not getting JSON back. I'm getting a string. So what I've done here on line 31 is use a built-in Python library called JSON. One second. Called JSON to take the text of the response and turn it into actual JSON. And that has many, many advantages. If you're not familiar with JSON, it's pretty simple. It's not always the easiest to read, but it's really easy to interact with. And if I'm passing this from one function to another, I want it to be actual JSON and not one big long string that looks like JSON. So after I printed this one, you can see that I printed in here, printing random image results as a dictionary, which is Python will refer to JSON in this format as a dictionary. And you can see here, I do not have that B or any quotes before this. I am actually getting a Python dictionary. And from here, I get, I think it's 3 per breed. So we better check out a dog here. There we go. So you can see that the API gives me random images of a dog based on the breed that I supplied it. All right. So those are our first, like, kind of not Tableau related calls. Let's move into some that are going to be more, I would say, relevant for our day-to-day here. So when you go through this library, you'll see that I have files 3A, 3B, 4A, or sorry, 5A and 5B. I'm giving the same examples of each of these in XML and JSON. I think I mentioned in session 1 or session 2 that the examples that are given in the documentation for Python, or sorry, for Tableau's REST API are mostly in XML, although I have been seeing lately where they've been filling in more JSON examples. So it is a personal preference. And I personally would use JSON all the time if I could, but if it helps you to be able to do one-to-one comparisons with the documentation, then stick with XML for now. When we get into the TSC in the next section, so the Python library for the Tableau REST API, we get away from constructing these ugly request bodies in the first place. And that, to me, is actually even more readable. So I look forward to kind of showing that to you guys as well in an upcoming. So to kind of just to define what's going on here, and then I'm going to switch to a more practical example, since we kind of covered this already, is so every call that you make to the Tableau REST API, requires authentication. I think we know that. But this is an example of how you make that sign-in call to the Tableau server REST API. So I've kind of broken this up into a couple different calls, and that's because in Python and in general, when you're coding, it's best to have your functions do one thing and one thing only. And that is, it makes it much easier to test that they're doing what they're supposed to and nothing else. Or if something is wrong, it makes it a lot easier to find out, okay, it's this function that's 4 lines that isn't working versus this monster function that's 80 lines. And now you have to go line by line to kind of figure out what it is. So the first function that I have here is just building this body for me. So this is the XML straight from the REST API documentation. And I'm just having it return to me with my personal access token name, which is defined here as a constant. When you see things outside of a function in capital letters in Python, those represent a constant. So I just subbed in using my FString, the name and the secret, which I have imported from another file, so I don't have to show it to you, and then the site name. So those are all the things that are required to sign in. My sign in function here makes a post request to the URL for my site on Tableau Online. And then the data that I'm sending it is what this function returns to me. The last 2 things here are just for parsing out the token from the URL response itself. This is one of the things, this is my least favorite thing about working with XML, is that the parsing is not as straightforward as it could be in other places. So essentially what I'm doing in these 2 functions is taking the response from this sign-in call and finding in a tag called credentials in any namespace, that's what the star means, that has the attribute token. And then in some calls, I may want the site LUID as well. So I have another little function that's just searching for that site ID within the response. So let's move on to making some stuff happen. I'm gonna show you this quick, but in the interest of time, I'm gonna switch to actually something that we'll actually be able to see. So I encourage you to look at file 4, which kind of covers a couple different ways of getting projects off of from the REST API. So you can get all projects by just making a simple GET request. You can see here how my response becomes this sign-in, these imports from up here. So let me run, if I just run get all projects really quick. And again, because this is returning something, not printing it, then I need to print when I invoke or when I call the function. So if I just call this really quick, I get an error called no module name Tableau sign in. Did I change the name of something? Or let's see, what do we Tableau sign in XML, Tableau. Oh, it is 03, and then I put spaces in it. Let me fix this really quick. I'll fix this in the repo too. This was a silly mistake on my part. You should have underscores between them. Otherwise, the syntax gets a little different. And they shouldn't start with numbers. Okay, this is all my fault, sorry. Let's just, like I said, I will fix that in the repo. This was a last minute change to try to organize things that clearly didn't work. All right, so let's try that again. So now if I print get all projects, you can
Kyle,
see.
you remember last session with all of the naming things and all the crap you gave me about how I name things?
Yeah, and then I went and did it this time, yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure, my stuff did run. I just wanted to throw that out.
It did run.
For anybody that was on last time,
So whoever's keeping score, we're tied at this point.
Anyway. There is a question in the Q&A. Maybe you can answer that, Kyle.
Let me see. Would pat ticket be a variable in another file or a function? It could be either. In my example, it's actually just a constant. So I have, and I'm not going to open it, but in that file called pat secret, I just have pat secret equals, and then my personal access token secret from Tableau server. If you somehow needed some logic to maybe log in different people or different servers, you could always write a function that would take some argument and return a different secret depending on what your needs were. So you could do either or. All right, so after I make this call for get all projects, and again, this is a little bit hard to read because it's XML, but you can see if you look through here, I've got here's a named default project. I have some information about the permissions, I have the description, I have the ID, et cetera, et cetera. So that's all well and good. There's a couple different ways that you can do that I've called out on here. But a little bit more exciting, I think, is let's actually create a project. Let's see what that looks like. So if I go into here and create Tableau server project, this is again in XML, I have the same example in JSON. So here we see the request body for this is a little bit simpler because all I have to tell Tableau server is the name and the description. If you look in the documentation, which is linked at the top here, you can give it more than that, but it has default values if you don't need to set them. Another thing to call out here as an example is, so normally we see, you see these arguments as just like project name and then project description. What this means here, if you see in the definition of a function equals and then some value, what that means is that's the default value. So if I call this function without giving any value for project description, then it will just sub in the default. And that's a good way to prevent things from breaking if you add additional arguments. So if you kind of like, imagine you're adding a field to a table and you want to give it a default value for everything that was put in before that table, or excuse me, before that column existed. You could think of that similarly here. All right. So then real quick, the create server project here, I'm doing the same sign in as before. I'm getting the token from that little function I showed you before, and I'm getting the site LUID because those are required for the URL in here. So this is a post request. So you'll see I've got again, this is the URL, sites, site LUID, projects, and then I'm sending it this rec body with my project name subbed in. This takes headers, and the header is the authorization. The last thing that I'll call out here, this is a nice little function for making some very simple interactivity. As you can see here, I assigned a variable and put it into something called an input. And what this will do, and I'll show you this in a second, will actually allow me to type live what I want the argument to be to go into the function. And I'll just show you that there. One thing to know about inputs is they are always strings by default. So if you need someone to give you numbers, you will have to cast them or turn them into numbers before you do any math on them. So you can see here down at the bottom right, it is prompting me for a new project name. And I will just say TCI is, and what does Zach say, is super duper cool. And so then if I just hit enter here, I get a response about the new project that I created. Here's the project ID. And just to prove to you that it worked, if I go out to my site on, go out to my site on, just mashing all the keys here. Here we go, online.
What's that score again, Kyle?
I go into my site on Tableau Online. Oh, here we go. I was like, don't be down. Don't do that. You can see TCI is super duper cool. There's the project that I just created through automation. And you can see, I'm not lying to you because there's the timestamp. So I know that was quick. I encourage everyone to go through the code in GitHub. Reach out to us on Slack, on Twitter, however you want to reach out to us, and we can clarify some things. But if I switch back over, I'm going to do the next time on here, and then we can jump into Q&A. So for the next session.
Real quick, Kyle, can you change that from March 30th to April 13th? I just realized that when I was.
Oh, yeah. April 13th. Don't show up again today. Yeah.
At 8 a.m. 8 a.m.
Yeah. April 13th. All right. 143rd. So in the next session, we're going to spend some time with the Tableau server client, which we've been teasing from the beginning, I know, but we wanted to spend
every
some more
time we're
with,
like next time.
Next time. But we wanted to spend some time with a little bit more time with actual, just normal REST API requests in Python because of the break. So we'll talk a little bit more about, we'll actually dive into TSC. We'll continue to talk about some more advanced Python things, like how to chain them together, that I kind of alluded to, some more advanced API calls, like when you have to have a little bit more involved request body or some logic involved, and like if it's this, go here, if it's that, go here. We'll move into some of that kind of stuff, and obviously more fun, more prizes. So with that,
let me share my screen real quick. All right,
yep.
So I'm gonna start first. Let's see. Let me put this in here. We're gonna do prizes. All right, so let me share.
While you do that, Zach, I'm just going to answer this question really quick. So
okay.
Online Tableau is fine to practice today's sessions, or do we need Tableau server? Tableau online is just fine. And we encourage you, if you haven't, go back to the docs for the first session and it'll show you how to set up a developer site on Tableau online that's totally free. And you can do everything we're doing here.
All right, we got 3 questions, 3 prizes. So for the first question, the first person to answer this in the group chat gets the prize. Second list equals, this is super duper cool stuff. If I printed second list 3, what would that give me? Duper, very first answer, very first
good job.
one.
Oh, it was John. Oh, no, it wasn't John. It was, we can give it to Ansari. I think that was just
that was the
that was just
we'll give it to, but good job,
Shabazz.
John. All right, Shabazz, go ahead and put your email in there, and we'll go from there. All right, question number 2. Come on. What are you doing, computer? All right. This was your JSON question. Kyle, you want to ask it?
Yes, and actually, I think I forgot.
You forgot to cover the topic.
Okay, let me steal the screen share really quick. I meant to say a little bit of something that I didn't say, so
So now you're gonna say the answer to the thing.
I'll amend the question a little bit here. So when I talked about here what I was doing with this this Python library called JSON. What is the difference?
We're not looking at that. We're looking at your music.
Oh, you're looking at my Spotify? How about that?
Yeah, that's so embarrassing.
It's not my day today, guys. All right. Now I can't. There we go.
It's so embarrassing for you.
I know, right?
If you guys don't know, we have fun. We have fun at work too. This is pretty much how work goes.
We harass each other at work too. Now am I sharing the right screen?
Yes.
Okay, so I did speak about the difference between what I would get from line 13 and line 31. So in this case, what is JSON.loads doing? First one to answer that in the chat.
Somebody said format, block string, JSON loads the object, gets the data in JSON format, converts string to JSON.
I think Mohammed got the answer. And Ritu, the only reason is I'm not sure from your answer I'm not sure if your answer covers it completely. What do you think?
So that's fine with me. Mohammed, go ahead and put your email.
Yeah.
All right.
So to clarify, JSON.loads takes a string and turns it into JSON. The other one that I was supposed to tell you guys is JSON.dumps takes JSON and turns it into a string. So just so we're clear. But yeah, Mohammed, please put your email in the chat so we can make sure and get that over to you. There it is.
The third one was also yours, Kyle, with the fix. You get that? You're doing it now.
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
While you're doing that, Claire, I just pinged it back in the chat. The recordings are at datatheories.com/Tableau coders.
All right, so I'm sharing. I'm going to pause my share for a second here. And
if you guys were curious, no, we do not rehearse these before we actually go live.
All right. So in the background here, I've made a little change to my create server project function here, and I want to see if anyone can tell me when I run this super duper project 2. This one's kind of tricky. Can anyone tell me why this function is failing? Mohammed got it. Mohammed, different Mohammed this time. Mohammed Amir got it. Header is not defined. So what I took out while you guys couldn't see was the definition of header.
Wait. Is that are you sure that's this? That's a different
Mohammed? Oh, it is the same. Apologies, Mohammed. We'll take, well, I spoiled the answer. Not fair.
All right. We're gonna do this. Type a joke in the chat. If you make me laugh, then you get the award. Gotta be funny.
I will say it doesn't take much to make Zach laugh. So
it doesn't. If you couldn't tell. Come on, this is easy. I was like, all right, yep, that's a winner. All right, yes, give us your. I love it.
I think that's my new Twitter handle.
Just Kyle is lame. MS, give us your email.
What was the joke?
I love it. I love it. Yeah, MS, give me. Sorry. Everybody didn't see it. The answer was Kyle is lame. That was the joke. That was all it is. I didn't realize it was to host and panelists. Claire, I thought you were being sarcastic. So that's fine. MS, go ahead and give us your email real quick because we got to wrap the call. I hope everybody enjoyed the session. I hope you had some fun with us. I think it's always better to not come in these super prepared because it's good to see us mess up. That we're just like you. We're always going to mess things up. We do have a joke from Jackie. Let's end with that. What do you call an egg that goes on safari? An explorer. Oh, I love it. That's great. All right. So a reminder, everything is on datatheories.com/tableaucoders. We hope to see you again in 2 weeks where we're going to get more into the weeds with stuff. Otherwise, hope you guys have a great rest of the week, great next week, and talk to you soon. Bye, guys.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great one.